Well, welcome to Lecture 3 in this series for EDUC 1635, Maths 1. My name's David Hewitt, and this week we're going to continue our journey looking at mathematics in the framework of our curriculum and documents and how we use them to teach and to guide our mathematics. They're quite detailed. Your first look at these, you might feel a little bit overwhelmed, but don't. They're fairly well structured, and we'll step you through their use. And again, they're here to guide you in your teaching and the students' learning, but they're also flexible enough for you to allow for your interpretation in order to meet the specific needs of the students in your class. And in terms of when we talk about differentiated learning, then we can refer back to these curriculum documents to see how they can actually support us, help that sense of differentiation in the classroom. So let's get going. Professor Peter Sullivan was the instigator and attributed to the key writer for the New Australian Curriculum. And there's a video here I'd like you to watch, and apologise that once again that I can't embed the video in the PowerPoint, so you'll need to stop the PowerPoint, jump into that YouTube link. Just take some time to listen to Peter Sullivan. He's very erudite and it makes some great sense. And he listened for these two question prompts. He talks about what is mathematics in his frame, and he talks about this really interesting concept of the nouns and the verbs of the mathematics curriculum. So when you're ready, just pause this video, jump out of it, jump into YouTube and spend a little bit of time absorbing the wisdom of Peter Sullivan, and we'll come back to looking at what the answers to those questions were. And of course, you'll know that Peter Sullivan refers to the content of the maths curriculum as being the nouns and the proficiencies as being the verbs, and we'll pick that up a little bit later. So moving on, let's look at some of this teacher language that we talk about and unpack it a little bit. First of all, you've probably heard of this word curriculum, but what does it actually mean? There's two definitions here, one from Marsh and Willis and one from Clandinin and Connolly. But basically, according to the first definition, it's an integrated set of plans and experience which a student completes under the guidance of a school. Now, interestingly enough, whether a student gets through a whole curriculum or a part of it, I don't know that the student would necessarily complete those elements of the curriculum with which they can't access the learning from. But anyway, it's a nice definition. Probably the better one for me is the curriculum is that which an individual learner experiences as a result of schooling. So the curriculum guides you as a teacher in terms of developing the learning experiences appropriate to the particular learners in your class. So for me, I'm a bit of a fan of the second rather than the former. In Western Australia, we're guided by the West Australian curriculum, which comes pretty much from the Australian curriculum. And the site here, you can just see highlighted in the top left-hand corner, the kindergarten to year 10 curriculum. That's the one that we're going to be looking at. Although it's described underneath the heading there, West Australian curriculum, the pre-primary to year 10, we do include the K to 10 outline within that. And you'll become very familiar with this site and this framework as well, as you access it to help you with your planning for your lessons. And it's also useful for helping looking at your assessments and your reporting requirements as well. There's the link for it. Take some time outside of this lecture to look at the link, jump into the West Australian curriculum and make time to become familiar with it. Don't expect to know everything straight away. There's quite a lot in there, but perhaps for us and our selfish purposes, or my selfish purposes in this instance, think about the mathematics that you're going to be exposing the students to. So what does the curriculum do? Under the school's curriculum and standards authority, that header at the top there, it's commonly called as SCASA, SCSA. The West Australian curriculum sets out the knowledge, the understanding, the skills, the values and attitudes that students are expected to acquire. And then there's guidelines for assessment. It includes a whole pile of things, policy advice and guidelines for government and non-government schools, and also home ed. So everybody in Western Australia is expected to, in some form or fashion, deliver against the West Australian curriculum outlines. Yes, well, back in my days of teaching, this used to be a fairly thick printed document, but of course now everything's available online. and you've got the URLs, or you'll be given those to access the various elements of the curriculum. But of course, with it being online, in terms of that middle paragraph, it talks about it allows the curriculum to be dynamic and more easily updated, and they're constantly tinkering with the curriculum. Not too badly, but they're changing things. So you always go back to the online sources, the most up-to-date and relevant curriculum documents, if you like. And then you use this online process to help you design your teaching and learning programs. Something that you'll also come to know and be aware of is this Alice Springs Declaration for Educational Goals. It's a really important document for all educators to be aware of, and that the declaration is now actually guiding the whole voice argument as well. So this is something that's really important. It's superseded the Melbourne Declaration, which was taken a couple of decades ago. This one's more current in December 2019, but it has two goals. One, that the education system in Australia promotes excellence and equity, and that goal two, all Australians become confident, creative individuals, successful lifelong learners, and active and informed members of the community. And this is what we wish to develop, particularly in our context of the mathematics teaching and learning in the classroom. So why do we have an Australian curriculum? Well, we acknowledge the ways in which young people learn and the challenges that shape their future, and this changes. Okay, so the learners today are very different to the learners that I encountered when I was first a young teacher, a few decades ago now. And the second dot point there, it's important that we ensure all Australians with skills, knowledge and capabilities that provide a foundation for lifelong learning, if we refer back to the Alice Springs Declaration that was picked up in there. And I guess the other thing about the curriculum, it's an equitable document, so that we have the same curriculum that runs across all students in Australia, across all states. This allows students to be able to transfer between states, and there's a consistency of learning that should be expected across the states. Of course, there are some variations, particularly in the way we interpret our year levels. But in terms of the Australian curriculum, it gives this basic foundation Australia-wide for all students, no matter where they live or wherever they're schooled. And I'm told the homeschooling community is the largest school in Western Australia in terms of number of students. So a lot of students aren't attending mainstream schools anymore. Parents are choosing to have them homeschooled. So what does it do? It addresses the personal, intellectual, social and emotional needs, and then it makes clear to you what you need to teach. And it makes clear to students what they should be learning and the quality of the learning that's expected to them. So while the curriculum is a document really for you as a teacher, it has those two explicit aims: to make clear to you what you need to teach, especially in the mathematics syllabus, and then also understanding for students. And how do we do this? Well, we do this through our assessments linked back into the curriculum, and then of course into the reporting systems itself, which the reports refer back or report back on the outcomes as defined that you've taught from the Australian curriculum mathematics. You're going to get lots of terms thrown at you. There are two things that come up, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. But so there's the curriculum, which is the overarching documentation that includes all the learning areas, and then each learning area has its own syllabus. And on the site, when you look at that K to 10 link on the SCASA site, you'll see I've just taken a little snapshot on the right-hand side of the some of the syllabuses there. There's more than that, but basically, the ACARA, the Australian curriculum, sits across English, Maths and Science, and that's across all states. And then they talk about, in terms of SCASA, these year level syllabuses, in this case in WA for Humanities, Social Science, Health, Phys Ed and Tech, the Arts and Languages. They're consistent with the Australian curriculum, but they've been contextualised to make them more suitable for WA students. So those particular year level syllabuses are contextualised for WA content and context, whereas the higher level ones, the English, Maths and Science, they're set and written and taught from at a whole Australian level. So while we talk about the WA curriculum and West Australian curriculum mathematics, it's actually the Australian curriculum that we're looking at. So curriculum, the set of all learning documents setting out those goals, and the individual subjects, if you like, individual syllabus subjects are then broken down for you. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And here's the maths syllabus. It's on the page. You'll find it's version 8.1, and then we reflect. As I said earlier, it's easier to update these documents online, so you're always coming back to the online version as your most current and up-to-date reference point when you're doing your learning and planning, your teaching and assessment, if you like. So here we've got under the K to 10 outline, you can see the breadcrumb sort of in the middle of the screen. I've clicked on K to 10 outline, teaching Western Australian curriculum, then we're in the maths version 8.1, and this is where we find all the content that we're going to be teaching to the particular students and the level that we're going to be teaching it at. There's the link to it, and again you'll have this in a hard copy, or you'll have it an electronic copy at least. You'll be able to click on that link and again have a pootle around the site and get to know how it's laid out, how you can change the view, and just in that bottom right hand corner you might see those 3 horizontal lines or the 3 vertical lines. That's just how the document's being formatted in an online version, and you can choose how you would like to view that, whether it's in a horizontal format or in vertical columns. And then when it's presented to you right in the middle at the bottom, you'll be able to choose, we'll talk about the ABLE WA shortly, but the year level typically that you're teaching. So if you're teaching a year 4, obviously you'll click on that year 4 level or the year 4 number, but in any classroom we need to be able to differentiate our learning, so we could expect to have some students working at a year 3 or lower level. We could expect to have some students working perhaps at a year 5 or higher level. So while perhaps the class is working at a year 4 level, we need to be able to know what happened beforehand to get to where we're going to be going, and we need to know where we're going to be taking the students post that. The vertical column allows us to see this. So if I clicked on the year 4 number there, I'd be able to see, I can't quite remember now, but you'd be able to see at least the 3 level content descriptions, the year 4 ones, and then the year 5. So again, in one view, you're able to see what was leading up to your content description in this particular year level, and then what it's going to lead to. Quite a nice little tool to have a look at. But again, take some time to have a play around in that and become familiar with it. So here we go. The curriculum documents, there's lots to it. And as I've spoken about, the maths language that we speak about is quite specific and explicit as well. So the teaching vernacular in terms of the, excuse me, the documentation. So get used to the language, get a real understanding. There's always glossaries in the syllabi as well that you can see what's being used, or a quick Google search, or better still ask your tutor, what does this mean? But as the second statement there says, just they're reference documents at the end of the day. They're there to help support you in your learning and teaching programs. They help you to help you with your planning. They help you with your assessment, help you with your reporting. But don't get buried. Don't get overwhelmed by the whole thing. They're there as a support. See them as that, not as a just a stack of documents that have no use at all. You need to manage that. One of the things, of course, in the curriculum is being able to cater for diversity. I've already looked at this idea of differentiation. Well, diversity in this case looks at things such as ethnicity, language, culture, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, sexual orientation, or geographic. None of those should be allowed to detract from a student's access to high quality education. So the Australian curriculum, Western Australian curriculum, pays great attention to this idea of diversity in terms of how we deliver to our diverse range of students in our class. And one of the ways they do this is what they call the ABLE WA document. And you can see the ABLE WA is an acronym for Abilities-Based Learning Education in Western Australia. And if you look at the second paragraph on the right-hand side, this document, or this curriculum, was developed by the Department of Education and Training in Victoria. And because they were so well received in that state, we trialled them in WA in 2015 and beyond, and then now they've become part of our curriculum. So if you go back to the middle of that screen where the breadcrumb is, you can see K-10 outline, resources, and you can see the ABLE WA curriculum. So if you're teaching in an ed support context, this is the curriculum or the documentation you're going to have to be looking for. And indeed, it may help support you with students with specific learning needs in your classroom if they're being mainstream. So again, really important you become familiar with the content in this little area in the curriculum documents on the SCASA website. So there you go. It enables students to be assessed, taught to, learning programs developed for them on the basis of their abilities. So again, the ABLES is a very positive statement. It's looking at what the kids can do and not what they can't. But then again, that's a metaphor for all the students in our classroom. We should be looking at it with a positive eye, and again, celebrating those little learning steps the students are able to make, and then develop our teaching programs based on what they can do as opposed to what they can't do. But another document for you to become familiar with. So when we start to break down, and again, this is quite a dense slide, I apologise for it, but you'll be able to unpack these. But just in summary, on the left-hand side, we've got the overview, and I'll just quickly unpack each of those. And some of it is quite self-evident, but anyway, let's unpack them as we go. So the rationale. In this case, it provides an overview for the purpose and the benefits of studying mathematics. Now, of course, this is about maths, so there's rationales for English, science, etc., etc. So why do we do it? Well, there's a statement there. The aims set out the general aims of the maths curriculum, and we've talked about before being able to produce numerate citizens, and we've talked about what numeracy means, and in our tute last week we talked about critical numeracy. The content structure, and it's quite detailed and specific and deliberate. It describes the way the content's structured, and it introduces the proficiency strands. And once again, you might remember the proficiency strands are those 4 elements, or in terms of Peter Sullivan's video, the verbs. They're the umbrella across all the learning, the content strands, if you like. So proficiency strands, understanding, fluency, problem solving, and reasoning. The content structure describes how those 4 strands are the umbrella of all the content. And we've talked about the content strands being number and algebra, measurement and geometry, and statistics and probability. So that's the content structure. Maths across the pre to 12 provides advice across 4-year groupings, okay, like P1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So that you can see those on the nature of the learners and relevant curriculum. The achievement standards, that gives you some examples about what the typical student at that year level could be demonstrating in terms of their output, their mathematics output. And you can see that last sentence, the achievement standards comprise a written description with work samples. So you've got you can have a pairwise comparison between what your student's doing and what the provided work sample is offering too. Again, back into diversity, and provides some suggestions and strategies for catering for those different learning needs. The general capabilities, these again, they're umbrella across all learning areas, and we need to make sure that we understand that even when we're teaching mathematics, that mathematics still has its own literacy, numeracy, excuse me, we need to use ICT. We definitely need to develop critical and creative thinking skills, personal and social capability, ethical understanding, intercultural understanding. So it sounds really complex, but we need to be aware of these elements when we're teaching mathematics. The cross-curriculum priorities are to make sure that we're not just teaching within the maths learning area itself, but understanding that there are other subject areas, particularly science, maths relates to, perhaps music, but also we need to look at how it relates to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, how it relates to Australia and Australia's engagement, and particularly how it relates to sustainability. They sit under there, and you can find further descriptions there. Links to other mathematics learning areas such as HASS and science, as I mentioned earlier. And then implications for teaching and assessment and reporting. And this is where you look for support around the assessment strategies that align with the, see this name of this document, principle of assessment in the outline, and assist teachers with grouping content meaningfully. So really important also that you read this document called the Principles of Assessment in the Outline and become quite familiar with that, because that's the the levels of assessment we're expecting across the curriculum, and particularly in mathematics. So again, just a quick unpacking of that left-hand menu, and you'll be able to go in there and spend some time just becoming familiar. I'm not going to say you have to recite all this verbatim, but you should have a general understanding of where it all sits, and particularly the rationale, etc., and aims. Okay, so how's the curriculum organised? Well, the P to 10 curriculum, as we call it in Western Australia, although I said on the document it says K to 10, the rationale outlines the purpose and structure of mathematics in this case. Then it's broken down into what we call content descriptions. And these are broken down per year level and per strand, if you like. So the content descriptions are what we refer to when we're looking to do our planning. So what's the content description? Say, if I want to look at, in a number and algebra sense, I want to develop the understanding for students to add 2 digits plus 2 digits. What year level does it sit at, and what does the content description say? So the content description tells us the core knowledge, the understandings and the skills. This is where you refer to what you want the students to learn, and in order to do that, what you'll need to teach. And then there's the elaborations, and they help you to illustrate and exemplify the content. So if you're not sure exactly what the content description is talking about, click on the elaborations, and that gives you a more detailed explanation. And particularly in these early years, if you're becoming familiar with the curriculum, they're really good to pick up. Once you're more familiar with the teaching, you'll probably be able to just pick up a content description and be able to develop a learning program around that. But while you're developing your skills and your knowledge and understanding, the elaborations are really useful. And then we've got lastly our achievement standards, and they describe the quality of learning typically expected of students for each year level of schooling. They include descriptions and work samples. So again, we're teaching year 4. The achievement standard for year 4 talks about the quality of learning typically expected for a student in year 4. Not every child's going to meet that typical expectation. For lots of different reasons. They might have missed some early schooling, or they might need accelerating, but just be aware that this isn't what you're going to use your ruler to measure every student in your class with against that. You might use it as a guide to see whether students are meeting that standard, whether they're not meeting it, or whether they're exceeding it, and what you're going to do about it. But again, look at the positive side of it and find what the students can achieve, and then see what year level that refers to. But the supporting materials are there. They're very useful. Here's our rationale. Again, look at the breadcrumb in the sort of the top of the page. K to 10 outline, P to 10 curriculum browser, maths, overview, and then there's the rationale. And you can see on the overview on the left-hand side that I unpacked earlier. So in terms of learning mathematics, what's really important? First sentence, learning mathematics creates opportunities for and enriches the lives of all Australians. And again, right back to that first lecture, we're going to talk about disposition, and we've got to make sure the students have this positive disposition. And look at the wording in this sentence. Maths creates opportunities and enriches. 2 really beautiful words. And then second paragraph, this is really cool. Maths has its own value and beauty. We don't understand that maths has a true beauty in and of itself. And the Australian mathematics curriculum aims to instill in students an appreciation of the elegance and the power of mathematical reasoning. And you can continue to read that. But again, when we look at the 4 proficiencies, understanding and fluency, we can then go into that sense of problem solving and reasoning, and it comes back to the elegance and power of mathematical reasoning. So I'm not sure you thought you were getting into something that was so beautiful, but I'm hoping in the next 10 weeks, by the time we're finished, you'll have a real understanding of the true beauty of mathematics and its inherent elegance and the power that it has. But then I'm already a convert, I suppose. Content descriptions, as I said, this is what you're going to be teaching to or learning, developing your learning programs from. And you can see in this screenshot there in the 3 strands, number and algebra, measurement and geometry, and statistics and probability. And if we look down the number and algebra, we can see the broad heading number and place value, and I'll show you this a little bit later. And then towards the bottom, patterns and algebra. So number and algebra, a substrand of the content strand, number and place value, a substrand of the content strand number in algebra. And underneath that first one, establish the understanding, has a description, it has a code, ACM NA001, A for Australian, C curriculum, M for maths. So as soon as you see ACM, we know it's Australian Curriculum Mathematics in that content description. The code then is NA, number and algebra, and then 001 is the order of the content description. But just be aware that the content descriptions don't always go in a sequential order. They developed all the content and then they went back and checked it and decided there are a couple that should have come in between two content descriptions. So for example, and it doesn't do this, but to exemplify it, I'm saying you might have ACM NA001, ACM NA002, and then you might have ACM NA268, then ACM NA003, which means they just came back at a later time and they realized there should have been a content description between those two. But again, in looking at the language of the curriculum itself, not so much the detail at the moment, we've got content descriptions. They're broken into the three strands. The strands are broken into substrands, and then we have the content descriptions underneath it. So just quickly, if we look at the first content description in measurement and geometry, we can see the code ACM, Australian Curriculum, M for mathematics, MG for measurement and geometry, and then the 006, the sixth content description in the series. So there's a language and an interpretation that we can make from all of that. So compare and order, and we've sort of gone through that. So the elaborations, what do they do? And you can see you click underneath the content descriptions. You can see the content descriptor itself is compare and order and make correspondences between collections initially to 20 and explain the reasoning. That the code is ACMNA289, Australian Curriculum, M for mathematics, N for number and algebra, and the 289th content description. And you can see here's an example of where this is a fairly early content description looking at comparing order and correspondences between collections initially to 20, and we'd expect to have this a fairly low number. But you can see by the 289, they've realized later on when they've revised the curriculum that this needs to be put back in, and then they couldn't resort the content descriptions they had already. So a little bit of a clue into what's happening there. And then here it is. Again, the content descriptions there, compare and order. And then when you look at the elaborations, the first elaboration there, comparing order and ordering items of like and unlike characteristics using the words more, less, same as, and not the same, and giving reasons. So always giving the reasons. But by looking at the elaboration, we now know that this is it's around the language of mathematics, and the language we want to specifically focus on are these words like more, less, same as, and not the same as. So it's a comparative language, and which is the first content description: compare, order, and make correspondences. But until we go to the elaboration, we perhaps don't understand that the word compare has these descriptors more, less, same, not the same as, that we need to be able to make sure that students understand. So this is around the language of mathematics. Second elaboration is about looking at ordinal language such as first and second, and then the third elaboration is around using objects personally and culturally relevant to students. So that's really important depending upon where you're teaching. And then on the right hand side, we won't worry about the Scott catalogue at the time being, but there's some further resources that you can click on in that Scootle little link there. So if you're not sure exactly what the content description is asking you to do in terms of your lesson planning, click on the elaborations and you can get a lot more support that sits there. Then we come into the achievement standards and the judging standards. So here's on the left-hand side the pre-primary achievement standard. And for number and algebra at the pre-primary level, don't forget, this is the typical standard we expect. At standard, students count to and from 20 and order small collections, and they make connections between number names, numerals, and quantities up to 10. Now, that's at a typical pre-primary end of year standard. We've got students in our pre-primaries that can't count to 10, and we've probably got students who can count to 100, 1,000, or maybe even more. But at the end of the day, if they're counting to 100, do they understand the 98th term. And what does 98 actually mean, do, say, represent, or are they just rote counting from a pattern? They know that 6, 7, 8, 96, 97, 98. So while the standard is there, we need to make sure that the students can really understand the 20ness of 20. Can they understand the 16thness of 16? Rather than just being able to count to and from. So there's a lot more in the standard than what might be described. And then if you're not sure, in the judging standard, you flick across here and you can see that there's a pre-primary link there, and you'll be able to find some extra information about what does that standard look like in a pre-primary. So again, once again, lots of support materials here for you. So sequence, rationale, why do you do it? Content descriptions give you the what to teach. My always focus is always what to learn, what the students need to learn. When I know what the students need to learn, then I know what to teach. So my focus is always on the learning before the teaching. The elaborations support you in knowing what it is, what are those key things that you need to be able to cover when you're delivering this lesson to the students. And then the achievement and the judging standards, they show you what's expected at that particular standard. So quite a nice progress. Again, lots of support material, but don't be overwhelmed by it all initially, particularly. And quickly, just in revision from, I think, the first week, we talked about the P10 syllabus, if you like. 3 content strands: number and algebra, which we're involved in, measurement geometry, and statistics and probability, which you will be involved with later in the coming years. Content descriptions grouped into sub-strands, which we illustrated in that example, which shows the sequence and development in each strand. And also you can have a look at those content descriptions across the year levels, particularly if you're looking at any of those content strands such as number and algebra, and you'll be able to see what happens at year 3, year 4, year 5 in one view. And then of course the proficiencies, the umbrella that cover everything. Every lesson should try to have element of understanding, an element of fluency, an element of problem solving, and lots and lots, of opportunities for reasoning. Here's the 3 strands: a number and algebra, measurement geometry, statistics and probability. You become very familiar with this in your teaching. And here are the sub-strands that sit underneath it. So we'll unpack that in a minute. And then across all of those 3 content strands and across each of the sub-strands, excuse me, sit the proficiency strands: understanding, fluency, problem solving and reasoning. Number and algebra, number and place value, that's where we are now. Then we'll be covering on in later years fractions and decimals, and patterns and algebra. And you can see the third box down, real numbers. Well, in the mathematics curriculum, we don't touch on real numbers until year 10. And when we look at money and financial mathematics, that's a substrand that crosses right up to year 10. So the other 3 that we're focused on are just mostly primary, apart from the patterns and algebra. And then the last one is linear and non-linear relationships. Well, that's 8 to 10. So really, what do we need to cover? We need to cover in a primary classroom, pre-primary classroom, number and place value, fractions and decimals, patterns and algebra, and money and financial mathematics. When we come into the measurement geometry strand, then we're using units of measurement, looking at shape, geometric reasoning, and then location and transformation. Pythagoras we don't touch until high school. And even in geometric reasoning, note it's not in the curriculum until year 3. But of course, we're going to be giving students lots of opportunities, even in pre-primary and kindergarten, to sort 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional shapes and to talk about those shapes. But formally, it's not a part of the curriculum until year 3, but informally, we always make sure that we introduce those opportunities. And then in the statistics and probability side of it, we're looking at both charts and data, and we incorporate those in our lessons as well. So, primary maths. The proficiency strands are integral to the content. They're a part of everything that you teach. Digital technology is a requirement for some of the content, not all of it. And we'll talk a little bit later around concrete, representational, abstract a little bit more. And just be aware that digital technology is not necessarily a concrete tool. It's possibly more of a representational, if not abstract. So be really aware of the purpose and the use of digital technology when trying to develop understanding in students. Calculators, in my day, they were big. Today, they're not really as big. They're ubiquitous, they're everywhere, and they're still a really important tool, and they sit on your phone or anywhere else. But again, allow the students to use them if they need them. And the last dot point is really important. The maths curriculum is a major contributor to development of numeracy, and I think we've underscored that last week as well, and provides opportunities to development of the other general capabilities. So we're not just focused solely on one learning area, mathematics. We're focused on the whole idea of developing the students' numeracy, and in fact their critical numeracy skills. And then what do they do to link to other subject areas, and how do they relate to those general capabilities that were described in the Australian curriculum? And you might want to refresh yourself on those. What does it mean? Well, it means that WA curriculum doesn't know the students in your classroom. You're the only one who knows that. And the quickest way that you can get to know those students and what they need is the most important part of your teaching arsenal. And then delivering a learning sequence to those students that's going to develop their learning from what they do know and extend their learning further along that continuum. So while the West Australian curriculum doesn't know the students in your classroom, it does provide a good guidance to support you in your knowing the students. Lots of opportunities there. And now again, unfortunately, I can't run this within the PowerPoint itself, but it's really worth having a listen to Sir Ken Robinson, Changing the Education Paradigms. As we say, it's only about 12 minutes, but it's a really worthwhile talk to watch. And if you've got a little bit more time, he's probably he was the biggest TED talk at the time, talking about how schools basically kill creativity. So, and that's a brilliant watch as well. So the link is there. Take some time to watch this before the tutorial. And when you're ready, just close down the video. But thanks for your attention and involvement this week. And have another great week ahead. I look forward to next Monday's lecture. Bye.